Good evening, everyone. For me, today is a very special day, not only because I'm seeing you all again. After several years without visiting the new Acropolis here, I want to sincerely thank each and every one of you for being here. I wish I had a word, or perhaps an image, something that could give back to you. The amount of embraces, the amount of affection, the amount of teary eyes, the number of people who thanked me, saying you were important to me. I am still searching for some expression that could truly respond to that. I haven't found it yet, mind you. I have the habit of writing, but it is very difficult to define for you what I feel in these moments, because, in the end, that is what it was for. It always was and always will be, and the confirmation that this makes a difference to someone, for me, is a sacred moment, and these small sacred moments I keep as the most beautiful jewels of my life. Those most meaningful moments that rescue me. So if one day I ever have doubts about whether I made a difference, I find it very interesting that we always keep this goal in mind. I'll make a difference in someone's life. I'll bring a little bit of light. In short, this introduction is justified, especially because we'll talk about a figure whose ethics were entirely dedicated to the idea of bringing light. Even from the earliest moments of his life, he matured this throughout his journey, but this gave him a high degree, an autonomy, an extraordinary strength. This idea that I want to bring light, I want to make a difference, has shaped great individuals, and this figure we are discussing today, very especially so. We are opening a new cycle here in Cuiabá. We are inaugurating this cycle, which will continue in Brasilia on the 2nd, and then on the 3rd in Rio de Janeiro. This is a cycle of tributes, commemorating the 150th anniversary of the birth of Mohandas Gandhi. Mohandas Gandhi, this great man, whom we know as Mahatma, as the great soul. And I hope to be able to convey to you a little of this great soul, to all of you who are here, that we might move very quickly to the beginning, to his biography, precisely because I did not want the focus of my lecture to be the biography, but rather a bit of his heart, a bit of the reason why he earned this title of Great Soul. The basic story of Gandhi's life is not so complicated in terms of facts. He was born in a small principality, which is Gujarat. He goes to England, marries very young. At the age of 13, child marriage is common in India. He leaves his wife in India and goes to England to study law. Already with his father having passed away, his brother supports him, supports his studies, and after 3 years he returns with a firm conviction. His brother hoped he would become a great lawyer and help the family. But when he arrives, especially in Bombay, he discovers that he did not really have much of a calling to be a lawyer, at least not in the way he had imagined. He was far too shy. Gandhi was always very shy, always. He used to say that even after South Africa, which was a turning point in his life, he would still tremble when he had to raise his voice before an assembly. For a lawyer, as you will have to accept, this is not a very favorable trait. It gets in the way quite a bit. So he tries to make a life in Bombay, but does not succeed. He returns to Gujarat to live with his brother, but still does not find much success. Even in Porbandar, which is the city where he was born, his brother manages, as a way out of that difficult situation, to get him a job at a company that had some legal cases in South Africa. At that time, South Africa was considered an El Dorado, not only for Indians, but also for Chinese people and many other Asian communities. It was believed that there, because of the discovery of diamond mines, it would be a place where one could get rich easily. Some people did build fortunes there, but it was never easy. It was a very harsh place, but he would discover this upon arriving there. Throughout his life, he spends 20 years living in South Africa. So much so that South Africa holds annual tributes on the dates of his birth and death. It is almost like a second homeland to him. He goes there expecting to be just a lawyer for a commercial company. But upon arriving, he begins to encounter such a degree of discrimination, so absurd that are practiced against Indians, that he begins to feel outraged, and he gets involved and takes up this cause. Look, we could say that Gandhi's life can be divided into before and after. South Africa, because there he begins to nurture a calling. He was always very spiritual, always had a rich inner life. But there he is nurturing a vocation for service to humanity, which reveals itself there. And so he continues working for this firm, but he begins to defend all the causes in favor of the Indians, who were tremendously exploited in South Africa. They worked under contract, a kind of slavery, where a person could never finish paying off the debts they owed to this company. You may be familiar with this disguised slavery, which still exists even today. In Brazil, in certain regions, people never finish paying off their debts to the company and work in miserable conditions. He fights tremendously against this, living for many years in the state of, in the province of Natal, in the city of Durban, Gun in Phoenix, and later returns to India. When he is settling in India, he is called back to South Africa. He had not even spent a year in India, and now he goes to Johannesburg, where he stays for many more years, carrying out many more works. We'll talk a little about this throughout the story. And finally, he manages to return to India. When he returns to India, he begins to shift his concern, which was primarily for the dignity of Indian settlers in South Africa, to the dignity of Indians in India. At that time, India was in the hands of England, and it is interesting how long it takes him to realize that there was no possibility of a dignified life for Indians under the rule of England. First, he believed they were benefactors, that they were uplifting the country, because it is no small matter, my friends. We have to consider the world that Gandhi encounters within India when he begins to travel to every corner of the country. The level of knowledge, of education was extremely low. The hygiene habits were more precarious than you can imagine. So there was a certain culture, spread by the English themselves, that England was rescuing India from barbarism. And in these practical areas, there was some truth to that. For example, in matters of hygiene, so there was some justification. But on the other hand, England was making Indians believe that all their millennia-old beliefs were nothing but crude superstition, that they had to forget their entire past and devote themselves to becoming as modern as England itself. As for England itself, even as there were some, let's say, standards of living from the past, but carried over in a way that was very ineffective, so that Indians could adopt some healthier lifestyle habits. And given this perspective of increased healthiness, of greater longevity for a long time, he believed that England was benefiting India until he came to convince himself, to be convinced on his own, that this was not true, and to resolutely set out toward the pursuit of freedom. In short, that is the story, and there are many details within it. What I find beautiful, you can go on. What I find beautiful about Gandhi is his philosophy of peace. We'll see that the central theme throughout his entire life is this idea. It is a simple equation for you to understand how Gandhi thought. It was as follows. He believed that there was a reality behind the appearances of life, which was the truth. He worked tirelessly for the truth, and truth was the very name of God, but truth could only be attained through ahimsa, non-violence. Violence believes in a divided universe, a fractured one, where some are against others, Whoever believes in a divided universe cannot believe in God, who is unity. He would then say that God, who is truth and unity, must be approached through ahimsa, and to reach ahimsa you need purification. Purification. One must work towards their own purification, not only in body, but also in mind, in emotions, and in spirit. So one may be worthy to practice legitimately non-violence, not as a propagandistic act, but as a pressing necessity, an urgent need for unity. This is the thought in a summarized way. This is Gandhi's philosophy. From when? I don't know. From as far back as he could remember, he kept strengthening this way of thinking. But it's truly remarkable, everyone, because he was a man who traveled everywhere. In South Africa, in England, he spent time in Paris. In India, he upended the whole subcontinent. He transformed that Indian subcontinent, and no one could make him change his point of view. He would change his perspective, but only through his own reflection, never through external manipulation. It is truly impressive to follow his journey throughout his life and see that his thoughts always belonged to him. If there ever was a man who was not manipulated, that man was Mohandas Gandhi. He thought for himself, and he thought very well. You may proceed. I chose an approach, which I hope you will appreciate. There is no shortage of books about Gandhi, but I found that the most interesting thing, beyond telling this micro story that I have already told you, was not to say what he did, but rather to say what he thought, which motivated what he did. We have a privilege, because Gandhi wrote his own story. He has an autobiography. This book that I photographed is the edition that I own, which is very old, from 1960, but nowadays several other publishers have republished this book. This book was written by Gandhi himself, and he had an experience with truth. He considered it as a synonym for his life. What? His search for truth. Basically, it was the same thing. And what is interesting about this book, you will walk alongside him. It is him explaining the ideas he had in order to justify what he did. So it is truly fascinating, everyone, because when you begin to familiarize yourself with the writer, you start to notice a little bit of Gandhi within yourself, some ideas that we also have, that we also share. But the conviction and moral strength of a man to not only think this way, but to guide his life in this manner is a delightful experience. It is not a small book. It has 523 pages, but I recommend it. Read Gandhi's autobiography. It is as if you are having a conversation, in silence, with a man who made history, and made history because he was truly human, a real one. The cause. India's independence wasn't the only cause of his life. The cause was truth. To serve God through the pursuit of truth. That was the cause. It is not without reason that people say, he is the father of India's independence. He certainly is. But Gandhi's cause was not India. It was truth. If not this cause, another. But here was a man destined to make history, completely surrendered to an idea that for him had the status of divinity. God. Let us move on a little with some texts of his own. I made a point of bringing them to you, passages spoken by him, because, look, you know, very much, just between us, that nowadays we are bombarded through the internet with quotes from Gandhi, Shakespeare, and Einstein. It's something like, I keep thinking, well, if I didn't have an image to maintain as a serious philosopher, I would start sending out cake recipes and pizza and other things and sign them as Einstein, William Shakespeare, because it's just too funny. It's funny how sometimes you receive, don't tell me this doesn't happen to you too, phrases that are banal, horribly so. And underneath, Miguel de Cervantes. Do you know Miguel de Cervantes? Do you really think he would say that? I don't know. Our lack of discernment, sometimes our lack of depth in getting to know the world of these figures, makes us fall for this kind of thing way too often. But these quotes here are from his biography, so you will see. Gandhi, in his own words, is almost like a diary. It is a confession. He writes autobiography like keeping a diary, and the passages are truly beautiful. Let us see what he thinks about God. There are countless definitions of God, because his manifestations are countless. They fill me with awe, with reverence, and with fear. And for a moment, they leave me completely speechless. But I worship God only as truth. I have not yet found him, but I am always seeking him, without losing heart. If this search demands sacrifice, even my own life, I hope to be ready to give it. And this sacrifice demanded his own life, and he gave it. On January 30th, 1948, he was shot down by a fanatic. Why? Because he refused to give up the truth. And for him, the truth was that Indians, Hindus and Indian Muslims, should know how to live together, to fraternize, to share their knowledge, their lives under a single territory. I don't know if you've ever heard of, going back to another great historical figure, who was Socrates. Socrates was sentenced to death and ultimately was killed by the Athenians and the Spartans. They found this hilarious. They would say, "Look, we don't need to kill the heroes of Athens. They kill them. They don't need enemies. They kill all their own heroes." I kept thinking of how valid this statement is, and how witty, coming from the Spartans. It's as if they were being ironic. About 2,000 years of history, even after their own story, it's like this. The Indians killed their own hero. It's hard to say that. Fanaticism killed its own hero. Anyway, that was his vision of God, and it's important, everyone, for you to know. Gandhi was never very attached to any particular religion, not even to Hinduism itself. He would learn the best from each one and accept it with reservations. During the time he spent in South Africa, he was approached by Christian missionaries in every possible way. He was taken countless times to attend Christian Mass while he lived in Durban. And even later in Johannesburg, he appreciated certain things, and he counted among the works he loved most the Sermon on the Mount. But there were other things he had reservations about. Regarding Islam, he loved many aspects. He read the Quran, but on other things he had reservations. As for Hinduism, he, who came from a Vaishya family, followers of Vaishnavism, a family deeply devoted to Vaishnavism, he himself had reservations regarding Hinduism, with regard to the code of Manu. Above all, the existence of the untouchable caste. He never accepted that. In other words, he would go about gathering the best from each tradition, but he had the discernment to know, not entirely. I accept this, and this, but this, and this I leave aside. In all the religions he came into contact with, Buddhism, he was a great admirer of its light. He was a great admirer of Asia, which tells Siddhartha Gautama's life story, and so on. See how interesting this is. I haven't even really started talking about him, and he already has a lesson to offer us, the ability to select the things that he chooses to live by. Do not buy ready-made package. Gandhi never accepted any pre-made package. Whatever was offered to him, he would open it up and carefully chew over what parts of it he would support and what he would not. In other words, he had his own ideas. He had an inner life. He had discernment. But at the same time, he never used violence against anything that went against his convictions. He had a remarkable capacity for respect for others beyond the ordinary, And in this sense, he is the man who knew how to live. That harmony, that fraternity, that nonviolence in the profession of a lawyer. In a moment, we will talk more about this. He defended his cases in South Africa in such a way that both sides would not come out too harmed, so that justice would be done, but that everyone would be well in the end. Imagine what it means to do that as a lawyer. He did it. And his success was due above all to this, being just with everyone. Friendship. This is another thing that brought Gandhi many troubles, because his concept was complex. Gandhi was hard for everyone to understand at that time. He was first rejected by his own caste when he went to England. Then he was rejected by his country as lawyer when he returned from England. Later, he was rejected as an Indian when he arrived in South Africa, and he continued integrating all this information about why people were rejecting him and realizing that he could learn from it. His concept of friendship is as follows. You can go ahead. I included it for those who will read the book, because I'm a hopeful person. There are 523 pages, very well anchored in their time. I included, in the version that has the page numbers, where all of this can be found. Think of it as something I'm doing for you, to encourage you to go there, to read and reflect. It is a very beautiful thing, to be inside the diary of a great man, to feel as if you are in dialogue, walking alongside him. It is truly beautiful. On page 37 he says this, a reformer cannot allow himself to have close intimacy with the person he seeks to transform. He learned this at great cost. Gandhi simply arrives in South Africa, and later, when he returns to India, the same thing happens. His house was everyone's house. It was as if a sick person came asking for help, and he would take them into his home. It was like a traveler came from who knows where, and he would welcome them into his house. And he began to realize that in order to teach people, he needed a certain distance. At the same time, people had a demand for exclusivity, that he would show preference for them over others, that he would favor them in defense of justice. That is, that he would be more of a friend with them than with justice. A series of jealousies and games that he noticed. It couldn't go on like this. On one occasion, he wrote to his brother and said exactly this phrase, whoever seeks the friendship of God must remain alone, or have the whole world as a friend. His brother, whom he loved so much, who played the role of a second father to him, after their father passed away, his brother turned against him, to the point of breaking off their relationship, because he said he was going to dedicate himself to humanity, and his brother wanted him to dedicate himself only to the family. And he writes very disheartened in his diary, but he doesn't understand that it's a matter of expanding the concept of family, that we're talking about the same thing. He can't understand. It's just a matter of broadening the family a little. It's interesting, because his brother, who had a great heart, on his deathbed, recognized that he was wrong. He writes a letter to him, already on his deathbed, asking for forgiveness and even asking that, with his values, he would raise his children, because those were the right values with which young people should be educated. In other words, his own brother ends up understanding this need. He had to have no restrictions within his heart. So he had a very particular vision, which brought about many problems. Even though it was so beautiful, in practice, this creates many problems. To love justice more than someone else is considered a crime by those who believe they have the right to their preferences and to being cared for. And he believed that the best thing he could do for the people he loved was to give them justice. This was not well understood, especially in his life. And as a lawyer, this brought him quite a few problems. You may continue. This is very special. Everyone, truly special, especially for me. Because in some lectures I have already mentioned, perhaps some of you know, Valmiki's Ramayana is the most beautiful book I have ever read in my entire life. I've been saying this for 20 years now, and to this day I've not changed my mind about it. I truly do not know anything more beautiful than Valmiki's Ramayana. The Ramayana he reads is not one I read. He reads a version from the 16th century, written by a poet named Tulsidas, which is very difficult to find here in Brazil. But in any case, he also considered the Ramayana the most beautiful thing in his life. He did not read it at that time. At that time, he was still a boy. He would come to know, see how curious this is. Gandhi would come to know for the first time an Indian classic in England through Indian music records, and the Brothers of the Theosophical Society in England. Through the Theosophical Society, he reads for the first time the Bhagavad Gita. At this point he was not yet familiar with this book, but he was an extremely fearful boy, and his Manny, whose name was Ramba, who helped raise him, and his siblings, seeing that he was afraid of ghosts, afraid of the dark, afraid of snakes, afraid of everything, told him, "Child, you can overcome your fear. Whenever you are afraid of something, close your eyes and say the name of Rama." Rama, who is a great divinity, represented in the Ramayana, one of the avatars of Vishnu. He developed this habit throughout his life, in the face of difficulties, to say the name of Rama. He said that even before he truly knew who Rama was, it was a great source of comfort for him. On January 30th, 1948, when Gandhi was shot 3 times in the chest by an Indian fanatic, before dying, in the arms of someone who tried to help him, he said, "Rama, Rama." He spoke the name of Rama. "I brought for you all. You may go ahead." A passage from the book I read, which is the version of the Ramayana by Valmiki, where it speaks exactly about this. If you ever read the Ramayana, you'll understand the reason for this recommendation. That closes the book, and it is so beautiful. Just look. By listening to or reading the Ramayana, you will obtain Rama whatever you desire, but be careful. Do not ask for too little. Good luck to everyone. This is the very first and greatest poem in the world. The future will read this. Therefore, I will tell you, when everything is falling apart around you, just say, Rama. We move from the spiritual to the passionate. Then comes ignorance, universal war. Say, Rama, and you will prevail. Your time cannot touch you. Can you grasp the beauty of a passage like this? When it says be careful, don't ask too little. That is, you are standing before a being who is prepared for you to ask him for the truth, who is ready for you to ask for wisdom. Don't ask for a trip to Disney. For heaven's sake, that's too much. It's almost offensive. This is what wins you over. Be careful not to ask for too little. Ask for things that are real. Your time cannot touch you. Gandhi understood the idea like no one else, and this accompanied him throughout his life, and it was born from the advice of his nanny. And he says, "From humble folks I learned the best wisdom," and he studied in England. You may continue. The truth for Gandhi is that the world is one world, and that the world is a world. Truth for Gandhi is the visible face of God. He considers that the world in its entirety is illusory, with its contradictions, with its hatreds, with its dissensions. Behind all of this, there is a truth, which is fraternity, which is unity. We are all one. This is part of the very Indian worldview. We are all one. The closer a person comes to the truth, the more worthy they become of understanding the mystery of God and unites with it. He draws closer to the real. Truth is the real, behind illusory, turbulent appearances of division, selfishness, and violence. Therefore, he was a servant. Do you remember the name of his biography that we saw earlier? My life and my experiences with truth. That was the key word through his life. You may continue. Because truth is like a truly immense tree. The more we nurture it, the more it bears fruit, or like a mine. The deeper we dig, the more abundant and rich are the gems we bring to light. In other words, more perspectives open up from a greater diversity in the art of service. Begin to understand the psychology of this man whom we are discussing. When he approaches the truth, he says, as you cultivate a tree, it bears more fruit. It is like digging the earth. It yields more precious gems. But what were the fruits and the precious gems that he sought? As a result, as a reward for seeking the truth, a greater capacity to serve. Reflect on this, try to apply it as a logic of life in our current world. The more I strive, but I'll have the right to serve. Wow, amazing. Now I have learned something profound. I have more to give. I have more to share, more to offer. He did not live in the dream of metaphysical retirement, where, for being so good, I won't need to do anything anymore. He sought, faithfully, the truth, so that, in return, he would have a greater capacity to serve, more things to give. This is incredible. Do you think with logic like this? What kind of person do you create? I'll tell you who you create. Mohandas Gandhi. That's it. This is the kind of person you create. With a mindset like this. But try thinking this way. For a minute, for a day. See the effect it brings to your life. It is a privilege to serve. Therefore, I'll strive to be worthy of serving more and better each time. You may continue. I believe that it is a mistake to expect certainties from this world, where everything that is not God, that is, truth, is nothing but uncertainty. To repeat it in a simpler way, in this world, everything that is not God is illusion. This is interesting. Everything that is not God does not deserve our trust. Reality, truth, is God. Everything that is changeable, illusory, everything that divides and everything that separates, is a fantasy. And this fantasy must be overcome, but never fight against. Against the people who fantasize. Fight against the fantasy itself. Another hallmark of Gandhi. Do not hate people. Hate the ideas that enslave people. And he continues to say exactly this. Everything that appears and happens around us is uncertain and fleeting. But this phenomenological world harbors a supreme being, which is a certainty. And happiness is known when one is able to glimpse this certainty and, having perceived it, to hold on to it. The search for this truth is the summum bonum of life. That is, it is the highest goodness, the supreme virtue of life. We live in our own time. In fact, we are still in Yellow September, a month dedicated to seeking, to work on and remedy the suffering of people who lack certainties, who become lost amidst so many illusions that our world presents. But there's no sense of life that justifies getting out of bed in the morning. Behind the problems that concern us during this Yellow September, there lies a great, a monumental, existential crisis of a person who has no certainty at all, who seeks nothing solid, who has no point of reference. He says, it is from this point of reference that I call truth, that joy comes, that happiness arises. Therefore, when one does not have it, logically, a person will be adrift, lost, and there is no way to truly help such a person. He may go through ahimsa. Ahimsa is the term that means nonviolence. It is the principle that accompanied him throughout his entire life, because for him, ahimsa was the result of purification. So it was something curious, because whenever he felt that he had, in some way, been violent towards something or someone, he would write about it in his diary. He is speaking directly to you in his diary, saying, "Look, my words were not appropriate. I was a bit too harsh. Do you know what happened? I am not pure enough. That is why violence overtook me, because he possessed an extraordinary courage. He believed. We'll talk about this in a moment. That what you nourish yourself with, on the physical level, is deeply connected to what you nourish yourself with, on the psychic plane, on the emotional and mental planes, in summary. So when he started to get too much thinking, impure thoughts, had put himself on an even stricter diet than the one he already had before. He would stop eating even more things, and he was already eating almost nothing. No, I have to cut out even more, because I'm impure. In other words, he had no limits when it came to sacrifice, to what he was capable of doing to himself, as long as the result was purification. Purification leads to nonviolence, and nonviolence leads to truth, and truth is God. This is Gandhi's logic. It doesn't go much beyond that throughout 520 pages. So, nonviolence is the foundation of the search for truth. Not a day goes by without me realizing, in reality, that this search is in vain if it is not grounded in nonviolence. That is, the search for truth is in vain if it is not based on nonviolence. To oppose a system, to attack it, is acceptable, but to oppose its creator, and to attack him, means to oppose yourself, to become your own assailant. For the same brush painted us all, and because of this, the divine faculties that we discover within ourselves are infinite. To fail even a single human being is to fail these divine faculties, and ultimately to harm not only that being, but, like him, the entire world. He did not speak beautifully. He lived it. When he arrived for the second time in South Africa, called by his African friends, and they themselves called Asians and Indians, to do this, they created an Asian department. But these Asians, who were registering their fellow countrymen, became corrupt and began to exploit the poor, unfortunate Indians who were there. So, to grant a license, a pass to live in Johannesburg, they charged a fortune to a poor soul who had nothing to eat. They began to corrupt themselves outrageously. So they brought him back from India to there. He collected evidence against some of these officials, clearly demonstrating that they were extorting people. And he went to the courts. He was a lawyer. He went to the courts, but he could not defeat them. South African court refused to convict them, but the institution for which they worked, that did this registration, dismissed them, and they were left with a very poor reputation in the eyes of society, because, logically, they had exploited their own brothers and were consummate thieves, even cruel ones. Then, for a while, these employees who had been, let's say, not convicted, because they were never actually sentenced, but accused by their own actions, eventually they began to face hardships. They couldn't find a job. Then one day they found a company that was willing to hire them, provided that they went there and asked for Gandhi's authorization to employ them. It was necessary for Gandhi to say that he forgave them. And he forgave everyone. He was overjoyed that these people had found work, but that was how it was all the time. Do not hate people, hate the forces that enslave people. You can challenge a system, an institution, for being unjust, but the individuals who are there, they are not the injustice itself. They are, for the moment, dominated by it. But which of us, and I say this as Gandhi, which of us has not been dominated by circumstances? And what did you do? One day, what all of us have done at some point, those things of which we are ashamed, because we were dominated by circumstances. Would you like to be defined by that act? To say, so and so is the one who once lost their temper with someone else, are you that? Or, in that moment, were you not yourself, and would you not want to be defined by that? People are not their mistakes. People are not their actions. And there is no way to exclude compassion from any person without also excluding yourself. It is as if, in a body, my hand were to exclude my foot. It would be mutilating me. When a human excludes others, they harm themselves. This was Gandhi's vision, and it was what he practiced in the courts. He wanted everyone to be well and to have a new perspective, no matter how absurd the crime might have been, or the accusation. Vegetarianism. So I ask you all, those who are not vegetarians, to have a bit of patience with the book. You will understand when you read it. He talks about dietetics and about vegetarianism so many times that I thought, for heaven's sake, what is this? But there is something behind it. It's not just simply because it's good for your health or anything like that. He actually has some beliefs behind it. Beliefs truly worked well for him. You may proceed. He says this: human supremacy over lower animal species did not imply that humanity should consider the latter as prey. The more evolved being would protect the lesser one, and there would be mutual assistance among them, just as there is from one human to another. Do you understand what this means to him? He is not only at the service of humanity, but of life itself. He limited himself, so he did not eat any meat. He never ate it. He did not drink any kind of alcohol, never drank it. There came a time when he stopped eating peas and removed other things from his diet as well. Then, one day in India, he saw how people, the cattle ranchers, the rural workers, would milk cows. He became so upset by this that he stopped drinking milk as well. This is one of the fundamental reasons why he no longer drank milk. The way people extract milk from cows, the lack of respect shown to these animals. He said, I will not be complicit in this. He completely stopped drinking milk as well. By the end of his life, he ate only fruits and nuts, nothing else. He kept removing things from his diet. Now, beyond that, beyond this humanitarian reason, he had yet another reason. When they asked him, aren't you hungry? Aren't you thirsty? Or aren't you thirsty? He would say, the true thirst of taste is not of the tongue, but of the spirit. I am thirsty for purity. I am thirsty for nonviolence. I am thirsty for truth. And for that I feel certain things disturb me, and so it becomes an experience. And how beautiful that is. Have you ever made yourselves into a laboratory to notice that? I don't know. Certain places you frequent, certain conversations that you engaged in with certain people, afterwards you find it difficult to control your thoughts. Afterwards you feel a tendency toward hatred. Certain foods you prepare tend to generate more negative thoughts. He constantly made his life into a laboratory. He came to the conclusion that certain things that he ate were so heavy, so toxic, that he tended to have toxic thoughts, and he couldn't control them. He would experiment, and it would happen. He would experiment, and it would happen. So he stopped eating that thing, and it didn't matter what the whole world said. He spent his life arguing with the doctor, with everyone around him saying, but this is good for you. A person needs this. You're going to get sick. I won't take it. He wouldn't take it, wouldn't eat it, wouldn't do it. No matter what the last thing was, the so-called legumes. He came to the conclusion that those caused in him a hypersensitive state of mind. It was bad for him. He didn't have that anywhere in his life. He realized it, and poof, That was the end of legumes for him. Don't come to me with empty talk. You could listen to all doctors in the world disagree. How can that be? I've tried it myself. It's a level of inner life, an experience within oneself, of perceptions created through observation, through observing your own life. Take a moment to reflect, everyone. How many conclusions about life have you reached on your own? They may even be, let's say, encouraged by a book or by something beautiful. But which ones have you concluded on your own? Or did you simply end up copying behaviors, patterns from society? And then it even becomes amusing. Eat eggs, don't eat eggs. Then you go back to eating eggs. Eat tomatoes, don't eat tomatoes. It's carcinogenic. No, it's not. Eat tomatoes. Don't you find that funny? That wouldn't have worked with Gandhi. He would eat it and see what happened, and once he reached a conclusion, well, not even the priests, from all the religions in the world, could sway him from that. They said he was stubborn, and he truly was. His contact with theosophy of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, at the time when Gandhi went to England. Blavatsky had already withdrawn, in England, after all her life's adventures. Who is another remarkable figure, truly remarkable. And when he arrives to study law in England, he begins to come into contact with literature through friends, theosophical literature. And then, for the first time, he reads the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, which is a sacred book, the quintessential Indian scripture, was presented to him for the first time in English, in an edition by Theosophical Society. Then he read it and found it the most wonderful thing in the world. He went on to read The Key to Theosophy by Helena Blavatsky. He says the following: "Look, when I read The Key to Theosophy, I discovered that the English were lying to us, that all our traditions were superstitions. That was not the case." And then he read How I Became a Theosophist by Annie Besant, where she reveals the harms of atheism. This confirms for him the harms of atheism. At a certain point, he was taken to the house where Helena Blavatsky was staying. He met Helena Blavatsky in person. They had a meeting. This kind of moment, to me, must be among the most precious in history, because there were two human beings destined to dedicate their entire lives to the cause of humanity. And for a moment, these two paths, for reasons we may never know, crossed paths. Don't you find that incredible? It's amazing. I would do anything. Like a fly on the wall witnessing such a meeting. They were two individuals who gave their lives completely to humanity. And when you realize this kind of thing, it becomes very important to see people of this kind, like a Blavatsky, like a Gandhi, because they help find Blavatsky and Gandhi within yourself. You begin to feel this movement inside you, this sacred pain, which, as Blavatsky used to say, cannot dry the tear that runs down your own face before drying the tear of the last of mortals. It is a deep commitment to human suffering, as if it were pain in your own body. And this is very important, to give everything you have, and to have more, so that you can give even more. This kind of thing. I confess to you that this episode from the book brought me to tears. Two magnificent beings, who, for a moment, make us realize that there is, resonating within us, this same greatness, this infinite capacity to grow in order to serve. This is truly beautiful for us to recognize within ourselves. It is a crucial point in his life. M.P., though he does not join the Theosophical Society, continues to read and study, and he comes to know, practically, his own tradition through the work of a Russian woman who was Helena Blavatsky. He reads not only her works, but also those of Annie Besant, Anna Kingsford, Edwin Arnold, The Life of Buddha, The Light of Asia. He develops a profound knowledge about his own life. And it wasn't just at that point. You will see that when he goes to India, he travels to Benares just to visit Annie Besant, who was ill at the time. When he attends the Indian National Congress, Annie Besant was there, who became the president of the Theosophical Society. After the death of Helena Blavatsky, she fought vigorously, side by side with Indian leaders, for the liberation of India. She was the founder of a movement, which was the Home Rule movement, focused on self-governance and self-sufficiency, which she had modeled after what Ireland had done regarding England. When he went to South Africa, he attended the Theosophical Society, organized reading groups for Bhagavad Gita, and welcomed theosophists into his home. In other words, the influence in his life of theosophy and the influence of this movement on India's independence, on the Indian tradition, by the Indians themselves, was something indisputable, and it was a very strong part of his life. Religion, as I mentioned to you, all of them. He held no prejudice of any kind. He was deeply cherished by the Muslims, which ended up provoking envy, the jealousy that led to his death. He always worked with the understanding that Muslims and Hindus are all Indians. He was held in great respect and often advocated for the Muslim cause and was highly regarded by them, very respected. When I speak of religion, I understand it in its broadest sense as the realization of self-knowledge. Religion as religio, as religare, to reconnect humanity to its essence, and through its essence, to the essence of the universe, to enable human beings to develop, bond placing them above circumstances, an umbilical cord that connects them to what is real, that elevates them above appearances. This fidelity, this reality, is what kept him from becoming a plaything in the hands of circumstances in which he lived. None of them, neither England nor India nor South Africa, with all their countless movements, were able to tame Gandhi. He was a servant of truth, and not of the opinions of men. The idea that renunciation was the supreme form of all religion held a great attraction for me. Surrender. That was the key word of his life. Without limits, without reservations, a total surrender of my life to the cause of humanity. The knowledge of religion, considered as distinct from the experience of religion, it seems, when the hour of trial arrives, so many strong things and people turn out to be mere straw in the wind. He used to say that those who claim to know religion deeply are the ones who despair in the face of death. They have no answer for life. Their religion is only intellectual. It is not moral. It is not lived. They are the ones who despair in the face of life's adversities. So there is a fundamental difference between knowledge of religion and the experience of religion. The former is straw in the wind, and it blows away just when we need it most. In the face of the danger of religion, all beings become one. We forget all differences and think of a single God. It's interesting that when he returns to South Africa for the second time, when he goes to Johannesburg, his ship is caught in a violent storm, and it almost sank. He said that at that moment, there were all kinds of people on the ship. There were Muslims, there were Indians, there were Christians, there was everyone. Everyone joined hands and began to pray together. He never saw so much religious fraternity as he did in that moment. Water was pouring into the ship. The captain was desperate, and he said, "Wow, if I had known it was easy, you had to do was shake the ship of humanity. I struggle so much for unity, and look how simple it is." In a critical moment, everyone knew what religion truly was. The differences arise in an illusory world. You can move on. The uniformity of religion, the uniformity of my experience, convinced me that there is no other God except for truth, and one cannot have a perfect vision of truth except after having attained ahimsa, non-violence, and it's not possible to identify oneself with all that one experiences without practicing self-purification of oneself, without this final observance of the law of renunciation, which is an empty dream without meaning. Whoever does not have a pure heart will never reach God. He says there are those who are nonviolent, only for show, who merely suppress their violence. They believe ahimsa can be practiced without being pure. They suppress their violence, but deep down they remain like animals. Why? Not concerned with purification. People, what a fantastic thing this is, this concept of his. We experience this very strongly today, don't we? Don't park in front of someone else's door. Don't throw trash in the street. Don't do this, don't do that. Because this gives us a veneer of being civilized, not because we are truly concerned about others. It is ethics by coercion and not by conviction. Do you understand this? I do it to look good. As people commonly say, I do it because I'm considered a civilized man when I do it. If I do it, I value looking into another person's eyes and feeling the needs of the other. I recently shared a story from a friend's lecture who was in Japan, and she said it's impressive how people are trained to follow certain social rules. So, you get on a bus. Automatically, when an elderly person gets on, someone stands up and gives up their seat. If a pregnant woman gets on, someone immediately gets up and gives up their seat. But I felt that this whole thing wasn't quite what it seemed. And I was on one of those buses, and the young man got on, so burdened with luggage, so tired, with the look of someone who was about to faint from exhaustion. People looked at him. He wasn't elderly, nor was he a pregnant woman. No one stood up. Do you know who stood up? The so-called uncivilized Tupiniquim. Me. Because I looked in his eyes and saw he needed it. I found her experience so simple, yet of exceptional value to me, and this reinforced what I already suspected: morality as coercion, and not as conviction. A morality that is not sensitivity to the pain of another, but is simply a standard, so that you can feel civilized. You would say, look, nonviolence done in this way is worth nothing, nothing at all. If there's not an intense process of purification to extract everything that is not human, nonviolence is just a facade. So, they are wild beasts, to which you have applied a veneer. Nonviolence, as a social standard, and without a pure heart, one will never draw near to God. That is truly beautiful. Prayer may continue. Supplications, adoration, and prayer are not superstitions. They are acts realer than eating, drinking, sitting, or walking. No exaggeration, they're the only reality, and that everything else is unreal. The only reality is you, connecting with that which is unreal, within yourself, and from there, connecting with the heart of the universe. There is a phrase that I always like to use in my lectures, which explains well what he is saying here. It seems that divinity is a great heart. It beats, expands, and contracts. As a great heart, it relates to all hearts of the universe, including our own. When we get closer to our identity, deeper and more real, to the essence of being, which is symbolized by our heart, we automatically establish an identity with the heart of the universe, because all hearts belong to the same family. Prayer does not require words. It is independent in itself of any effort of the senses. I'm absolutely certain it's an infallible means of purifying the heart from passions, but it must be united with supreme humility. That is, I am not God. I'm his image and likeness. I'm something that composes him, like a cell, but I cannot, upon feeling that I resemble God, believe that I'm God. This is what Jung called the transgression of the ego. As we draw closer to our divine essence, we begin to think we are gods, and yet we are still far from that. Our consciousness sustains us. A perception like this for over 10 seconds. We have seen. This is wonderful. We have a reference point. Our identity. still has a long way to go. Humility is needed not to fall into madness, which so often happens throughout history. Man begins to think he owns God because he has had some connection with him. Justice and law. This, during his time as a lawyer. Is there anyone here who is a lawyer? These are the most beautiful things I have ever read about this profession in my life. Spoken by Gandhi in practice of this profession. Just look at this. I had learned the practical path of the law. I had learned to discover the good side of human nature and to find the way to the heart. I understood that the true mission of a man of law was to build a bridge over the abyss that separates adversaries. In other words, a law was not to harm one to benefit another, no matter how just that might seem. It was about building a bridge to unite adversaries. And that was how he practiced this profession. And when it could not be that way, he would leave and walk away. And that is what happened. And that is how he worked. And it was not for lack of work, for he had many clients in Africa and India with this way of working. Experience has shown me that the fastest way to achieve justice is to do justice to your adversary. So that case, for which he went to South Africa to resolve, which involved a company that had been wronged by another company. He went to the other company, sat down with the company president and said, "Look, I have already examined the case, but I understand you. The circumstances you were in, with few alternatives. This seemed like a way out to you. You didn't think much about the other side, but I know that now you are aware that you know it was not the right thing to do. I do not want to harm you." Then the owner of that company said to him, "All right, I will make an agreement with the other party. If you can get him to let me pay debt over 10 years. He went to the company that had hired him and said, "Let him pay over 20 years. And he succeeded. And the two parties involved, who were even relatives, began to live in great harmony. He went there for that purpose and settled it thus. It is evident that to judge a man solely by his outward actions means, at best, to surrender self to dubious conclusions, since the spirit does not possess sufficient data on which to rely. If one is to judge a man by his actions, spirit must judge spirit. Essence must judge essence. I know that in a moment outside himself, a man was overtaken and is not capable of acting, but I do not know, within himself, what he is truly capable of doing. I know his heart. So I do not judge a man by his actions. What a fantastic thing, my friends. This is extremely touching, wise, and original, and he practiced his profession in this way. This was his practice. This was his life. Consider this. My respect for jurisprudence kept growing. In it, I discovered an element of religion. I understood that the teaching of non-possession given by the Gita meant that those who aspired to justice should act in the manner of trustees, and when entrusted with considerable assets, they would refrain from considering even the smallest portion of those assets as their own property. The trustee or faithful custodian manages the life, the finances of a person, while that person is still incapacitated, usually a minor. The trustee manages knowing none of it is. He says, "A just person does this with his own body, to his possessions, to his life. His life is not his, nature owns it. His life was granted by life itself, and it belongs to it. Therefore, I do the best I can through my body. But I do not want anything for my body. I know that even it is not mine. I'm only a faithful custodian, a trustee of a body that life has lent to me. Therefore, I am not going to treat it as if it were mine, nor will I seek to fill it with riches, as if that had any true value. Do you understand? I'm a faithful custodian of life. Life does not belong to me. Therefore, I cannot act arbitrarily, seeking to unjustly enrich a life that is not mine. I'm a being, and as a being, I am here to organize the things that life has lent to me. Life has granted me shelter in its house so that I may place its things in their proper place, but I am not the owner of this house. Lao Tzu used to say, the wise men of ancient times behaved as if they were hosts of a host, very ceremonious, In other words, they are guests in nature, and nature is very ceremonious. Know how to treat the house of your host with respect and don't think you own anything. Commitment, which for him was the most beautiful thing, what rescues humanity from chaos, is the commitment to truth, the commitment to goodness, the commitment to God. What we often consider the worst thing in the world, for him, was the best. And yet, throughout my entire life, the steadfast devotion to truth has taught me to appreciate all the beauty of commitment. Many times, this has put my life in danger and brought about the discontent of my friends. But truth has the hardness of a diamond and the delicacy of a budding flower. Carl Jung, when conducting his experiments with the unconscious, said sometimes he had to go down every abyss, and that he always ran the risk of never returning, of staying there, of losing his reason. He said, I come back, because I leave a rope tied to the world, which is my love. I have love for the world and I want to benefit it. I have love for people and I want to help them. And it is this commitment to being, to the world, that brings me back from the unconscious to the conscious. You understand that I am committed to an idea, a dream, an ideal of minimizing the pain of others. You are amid chaos, but I cannot let myself be defeated. I have a great mission. I have to minimize someone's pain. I have a great mission. I have to serve the truth. I have to be an example of purification, of nonviolence. Commitment is like a rope thrown into the middle of the well of everyday and ordinary life. If not for it, you cannot get out of the well. Commitment is the mercy of nature toward all beings. Through it, you can get out of any situation. And he used to say that commitment, as hardness of a diamond and delicacy of flower in bud. I realized that a vow, which is a commitment, far from closing the doors to true happiness, actually opens them. A vow brings happiness. Now, I do not live in vain. I live for this. This is greater than any suffering I endure. Dignity may endure. I have never been able to understand how someone can feel honored when seeing a fellow human being humiliate themselves before them. It is a duty to unite politeness with courage, to possess an innate kindness, joined with the desire to do good, even to one's adversary. So, in situations, for example, in South Africa, where an Englishman slaps or injures an Indian who worked under contract for him, he was horrified to see how this man could take pleasure in witnessing another suffering. He went to the courts against this man. But before that, he went to visit him. He went to speak and said, I do not understand why you felt pleasure in doing this to another human being. I understand that you were not yourself at that moment, and I do not want anything from you. I will refrain from prosecuting you. If you grant this man his freedom, release him so he may work elsewhere. And it is said that the man was ashamed in front of him to be treated in such a way. Someone who, despite his cruelty, was able to understand him and simply asked him to understand as well and to give another person an opportunity. This was the practice of Gandhi as a lawyer. Have you ever seen anything like this? He achieved everything, my friends. He won every case. In this way, he won over judges. He won over everyone. Service is an honor. He purified himself in order to serve better. Remember, if I found myself completely absorbed in the service of the community, the deeper reason was my desire to be perfect, to serve as a religion. And I had embraced this faith with the feeling that it is through serving that one can reach God. His religion was to serve selflessly, truth, goodness, and humanity. So when people say, look, Gandhi was a Hindu. No, Gandhi belonged to religion of service, selfless and pure, toward humanity. That was his religion, and truly his own faith. If we devote ourselves to service out of vanity or fear of public opinion, a person becomes stunted, and the spirit suffocates. The spirit needs to express itself in order to be healthy, and its expression is selfless service. Service rendered without joy helps no one, least of all the one who receives it, and also the one who performs it. But all other pleasures, any other occupation, none of them compare in any way to service performed with a spirit of joy, a love for serving. He would seek out people, something remarkable. When an outbreak began in South Africa, a kind of black plague, a bit different from the one in the Middle Ages, but just as deadly, he volunteered as a nurse and went to work caring for people with the Black Plague. During the Boer War, he volunteered as a stretcher bearer and nurse. He went right into the heart of the war zone. During the Zulu Rebellion, he volunteered as a nurse, again put himself in the midst of conflict. These are the kinds of situations that most people try to avoid, so as not to suffer the consequences, but he would go right into the center of it all, seeing in it an opportunity to serve, whether someone would recognize it or not recognize it. He didn't even intend to stay in South Africa. He couldn't say. He would say, there is suffering, they need me. He would volunteer. Generally, he was accepted. He never studied nursing. But he became a nurse, driven by a desire to serve, without infinite patience. It was impossible to get people to actually start working. The reformer has the spirit of reform, not society itself. He was well aware of this. He used to say, when I call people to protest, thousands show up. But when it comes to working, only a handful come. Through my love and by my example, through my love for work, I'll convert them. The reformer carries in him the spirit of reform, while others do not. They have the spirit of revolt, not of reform. He knew he had to convey this through his service. He knew he had to do something. He'd go on foot street by street talking to people, asking them to maintain hygiene in their homes. He would do it in the most difficult way. Sometimes he would do it in a simpler way. He carried out all his actions, even at the end of his life. Gandhi was already in the final stage of his life, shortly before he died. At the age of 78, he would walk through the streets, convincing people that it was possible for Indians, Hindus, and Muslims to live together in harmony. This was the last cause for which he fought. Tolerance. Our very differences become a source of support among people who are tolerant, charitable, and sincere. So he would have lunch with Christians and dinner with Muslims, all on the same day. He was warmly welcomed and cherished in both homes. He was warmly received everywhere he went. As my understanding of Ahimsa matured, I began to watch more closely over my thoughts and my words. He became a diplomat, and that was my diplomacy. To know how to introduce your will into the world with the least possible harm, and he did just that. He carried out his causes. He did not refrain from acting just to avoid offending someone, but he did so with the least possible harm to people with the smallest degree of offense and violence. If possible, none at all. What barrier is there that a feeling that comes from the heart cannot break through? A person and their actions are two distinct things. See, this is his philosophy. Do not judge people by their actions. Judge them by their essence, which they may not yet know. And you can help them to discover it. Do not judge a person by their actions. A person and their actions are two distinct things. Although a good deed should invite approval, and a bad one, disapproval, the author of the act, whether good or bad, should always be met with compassion, according to the situation. Hate the sin, not the sinner. Write this phrase down on your bathroom mirror, on the door of your bedroom closet. It is extremely useful. Hate the sin, not the sinner. Here is a precept that is rarely applied, even though it is easy to understand. That is why the poison of hatred spreads so quickly in the world. It is truly beautiful. And this is what I practice today. Truly beautiful. I am not speaking of a man who said these things. I'm speaking of a man who truly lived them deeply in every moment of his life, from the time of his maturation, especially from the time he went to South Africa, which is the moment when Gandhi began to put into his practice, into his actions, all the ideas he had been developing since his childhood. As for literature, just briefly, the books he mentions, he loved Tolstoy very much. When he was in South Africa, he created his first project of his own ashram, which was the Tolstoy farm. That is why he even exchanged letters with Tolstoy. He loved Tolstoy's work, especially this one. The kingdom of God is within you. The idea of peaceful resistance. He drew inspiration from Tolstoy, a short exposition of the gospel. And what then must we do? He mentions these books. John Ruskin, an English writer, whom we know so little about. But I have seen many people praise this writer. I intend to read him as soon as possible. He says that this book, even the last one, changed his life and his understanding regarding work. All work is dignified, and all work is the best tool for human fulfillment. He draws this idea from Ruskin. Edwin Arnold, The Light of Asia, The Life of Buddha, and the celestial song the Bhagavad Gita and Ramayana by Tulsidas. These were the books that enlightened, that he most frequently referenced throughout his life. Self-control, involuntary thought, is an affliction of the spirit, and to subdue thought, therefore, means to subdue the spirit, which is even harder to bend than the wind. It is only when a change is demanded that a transformation occurs and is exercised from within that control can become beneficial. Control imposed from outside is repression, while control from within is beneficial. Without total surrender to divine grace, no complete mastery of thought is possible. He used to say that of all the struggles he took part in, this was the fiercest battle he ever fought, which was the control of his own thoughts. He would say that a poorly controlled thought sabotages any cause, no matter how great it may be. It was the most relentless of all battles, and he was only able to succeed by thinking this: I serve God. I have a cause. And thus he managed to subdue his thoughts. Satyagraha. This word, so special, was coined by him himself, or more precisely, by his young cousin, Mohandas Gandhi, who went with him to South Africa and ended up becoming part of his ashram. He wanted to create a word that would represent peaceful resistance in the way he understood it. And Mohandas suggested something similar to Satyagraha. He modified it a bit and created Satyagraha, which is nothing more than firmness in truth. In this way, he liberated India. Peaceful resistance meant performing acts that were just, but that were forbidden, yet without seeking confrontation, without any kind of violence. And so he organized the Salt March. Have you ever heard of the Salt March? It was decisive in India. The British simply wanted the Indians to buy their salt, and they forbade the Indians from going to the seashore to place their little pots with seawater to let the water evaporate and use the sea salt. They couldn't do that. It was a crime. So what did he do? Peacefully, he gathered all the Indians. He went along with them. Everyone went to the seashore with their pots. They put water there and made their own salt. As a result, everyone went to jail. He was arrested so many times that when he built his ashram, the second time he went to South Africa, he chose land near the penitentiary. This is serious. It's true. He says, I picked a piece of land that was very close. It was practical for us, because we were there all the time anyway. Imprisoned in South Africa, imprisoned in India, countless times. If I could make popular the use of the power of the soul, which is just another name for the power of love instead of brute force. I know I would be able to create an India capable of challenging all the evil forces in the world. Do you understand this? Strength is not about people that take up arms. If they knew that truth is a rock, they would serve the truth. They would be the best armed people in the world, capable of confronting anything. And he was like that. I am faithful to the truth, and I will move forward toward it. I will take salt from the beach. They will use violence against us. We will not be violent. And we will keep fighting for the truth. He practiced civil disobedience for just causes, without any violence. And it drove the English crazy, because he was a strategist. And the viceroy never knew what his next move would be, what he was going to do next. He would come up with the most unexpected things. They thought he was just going to the seashore to collect salt. And he was very intelligent, very strategic. Good, legitimate causes, where injustice was prevailing, but always in a peaceful way. And everyone was left bewildered, because how do you arrest someone because they collected salt from the sea? It was something that utterly ruined England. In the eyes of public opinion around the world, he would target these weakest points, where England exposed itself to ridicule because of the magnitude of its injustice, and he would gradually undermine the foundations of that domination in this way. The CAD was a masterpiece of his. The textile industry was very strong in India, but all the raw materials came from abroad, from England, and there was no way to clothe the Indian people if it weren't for those textile industries, which were controlled by the English. With all the raw materials coming in, all the raw materials being foreign, he began to think that he would learn to spin and weave, and he started searching, going from house to house where there might be someone who still had a spinning wheel, and he discovered, thanks to a friend, in the local area, out in the countryside, a house where people had 6 spinning wheels lying in the backyard since no one used them. He hired these people to teach him how to use them. And do you know what he did? He taught the people how to make thread and how to make clothing. Which was this? Khadi. Which was the clothing he wore. It was made from cotton, spun and woven by the women of India, who, through this, kept themselves occupied, earned an income, and participated in the process of independence. And he could go to England and say, "We no longer need you to clothe ourselves." And everyone started dressing like him. And that was it. This changed fashion. Dressing like Gandhi became fashionable, so the great intellectual leaders of India all dressed in khadi. And that was the end of it. Problem solved. Let's move to the next one. A truly extraordinary level of strategy and an extraordinary sense of purpose. Swaraj. Swaraj means liberation, and the phrase he used regarding liberation, the liberation of India, for him, Swaraj, is the Swaraj of the poor. It is that which combats the liberation from poverty, but not only external poverty, but also internal poverty. He used to say that no one will be able to achieve Swaraj without fighting their own internal poverty, the desire to prevail at the expense of another's well-being, the desire to prevail at the expense of violence, the desire to exploit others in order to gain some benefit, and internal poverty. Also, from a physical point of view, cleanliness, hygiene in your home, in your life, respect for the objects that surround you. He also led a campaign for civility, and therefore, his concept of poverty was more than simply physical poverty. True liberation is the liberation of the poor, both in body and in spirit, and it was for this that he fought. You may continue. This is Pierre Mille, who is a very interesting man, a historian. He wrote in the 1940s an addendum to Gandhi's biography, after Gandhi had already passed away. And this quote of his, I found it wonderful. He was the man of our time, who believed in humanity the most. Look, that's a fact. I don't know if he was the man, but at least he was one of the men of our contemporary era who most believed in humanity. He not only believed, but rolled up his sleeves and began to work for it. And he achieved significant progress. Needed was others to keep believing in humanity. The greatest evil of our time is a machine that makes us lose faith in humanity. Today, we live bombarded with messages that make us stop believing in humanity and even stop believing in ourselves. He was someone who believed in humanity the most. You can go on. This quote of his is my favorite. I think it is almost violent. I think he broke the silence with this quote, so powerful it is. If a single man reaches the fullness of love, he will neutralize the hatred of millions. A single man, and he strove to be that one man. The fullness of love. Perhaps not, but he reached the highest point that his life allowed him to. At 78 years old, the greatest amount of love that he was able to hold within himself, to let overflow, to share. I brought for you a small excerpt from a poem remembering the name Rama, the very name of Rama itself, this name that he utters in his final words, the example that Rama was for him, the inspiration. I bow to Rama, Lord of the worlds. Again, guardian of Dharma is renewed. We return to polish our weapons. We take up our armor again. Behind the steel, behind the blades, our hearts awaken, burn and cry out. Those who suffer and vibrate in your name, Rama, will never walk the earth in vain. Even if the world trembles or the night falls, time itself ceases before your name. Jaya, what is this doubt in my heart? Jaya is a greeting given to great beings, divine beings, human beings. Jaya is honor. It is glory. And I would like to leave, as a conclusion to this lecture, one final image. Jaya Mahatma. Glory, greatness. Man of a great soul. I hope this touches you, because our soul's likely the same size. The one that was awakening. And certainly, the best way to honor him is to awaken our own soul. He dedicated his life to this purpose. We have a great soul, hidden within a small consciousness, which is not aware of it. And this man gave his life so that our consciousness could expand and become as great as we need it to be. You may go on, please. And that's it. Forgive me. We have gone quite a bit over time, but I really wanted to share this story with you. It is a moving and beautiful story, and it helps us so much to believe in humanity. Now, on October 2nd, we mark 150 years since the birth of Jaya Mahatma and of Mohandas Gandhi. The Mahatma, remembering such great people among us is important. That is all. Thank you very much for the presence of each one of you. Do we have any questions?
We do.
We have received a question. We have 2 questions here on our WhatsApp, and they are excellent questions. One of them is a question from Dom Carrijo. There was much talk about purification, that in order to reach Aisha, one must be pure. Some foods led him to believe in their toxicity. Those who do not have a pure heart will not know God, the truth. But after all, what is purification? But after all, what is purity for Gandhi? And how does one reach this state of purity? In his view, did he ever consider himself pure at any point in his life? Did he come to know the truth, to know God? The first thing that must be said
is that Gandhi was tremendously humble. Therefore, he certainly did not attain the truth, but he must have reached a small part of it. He did not attain purity, but perhaps a small part of it. But if you were to ask him, he would say it was even less, because he was very humble. For Gandhi, purity are the ideal conditions for you to break through the veil of illusion and see the truth. And it is no use for you to tell me the opposite, that the purity of the body has nothing to do with the purity of the soul, because I feel that there is only one law within the human being. And if I allow impurity on one level, you cannot serve two masters at once. Isn't that so? If I admit impurity in the body, I will not have the moral strength to banish impurity from my thoughts, from my feelings. Now, purity is a goal. What do you need to do at this moment? Purification. To the greatest extent I can. Now, the result of complete purity, at some point in the future, is a worthy goal. But what we seek here is purification, and to this purification he dedicated himself every day of his life, developing strategy after strategy. It is truly delightful. I hope you read slowly, so you can read Gandhi's biography at length. It is a real joy to spend time with him, crafting strategies to overcome his own mind. You will feel sad when you finish the book. It is a pleasure to walk hand in hand with Gandhi for a while. And he sought purification. He did not want, nor did he even imagine, that he could achieve absolute purity. And he believed that all things harmonize and nourish each other, feeding one another. A pure body supports a pure soul. A pure mind supports pure feelings. And so it is. We should not set a precedent, as the jurists say, to establish jurisprudence for living together with impurity. He used this as an argument, encouraging Indians to clean their homes so that they would not be impure souls, and so that they would be worthy of their gods. What else do we have?
we have the second question from Morrow. What is love? This true love. And is it possible to live it? In fact, we have spent the whole night
Talking about a man who lived this love throughout his entire life, or at least for most of his life, when he matured, when he blossomed into it. Technically, I would even recommend to you all who are on the new Acropolis YouTube channel that there are many lectures about this topic. Love is the search for what we lack in order to be complete. This is from Hesiod, the great Greek thinker. The search for what we are missing, so that we may become whole. And what is that? Justice, fraternity, kindness, integrity, purity, all the virtues that allow us to be complete as human beings. For what purpose? So that we may serve as human beings. Nature needs service from human beings. It does not need half men. It needs whole men to be able to fulfill the work that awaits them. Love is the pursuit of becoming whole. As Plato would say, the best thing we can do for those we love is to grow as human beings. Only then can you truly ensure anything for them. Therefore, every struggle for self-improvement, like that of Gandhi and so many other men throughout history, like Helena Blavatsky, a contemporary, was a struggle to purify the elements that jammed the gears of the wheel, that prevented them from weaving the good thread. They wanted to grow in order to serve, and that is love. Unconditional, infinite. Whenever they manifest themselves, love will be with them. They are servants. Find this within yourselves, and that is the most beautiful thing. Every time I hear that a man has done this, I find myself more. I recognize myself, because this pain that we feel in our hearts is our potential for Gandhi, for Blavatsky, for so many other men. This exists within us. That is what is most beautiful about this story. It allows us to recognize ourselves. That is, even today we still benefit from their love. But that is what is most beautiful.
Are there any questions? There is one more. Of course, we will answer all of them, virtually. But here is one more opinion. The person did not identify themselves. What is your opinion about this moment, when political leaders defend violence as a way to resolve human differences? Has humanity, have Gandhi's teachings, failed? Is it still worth believing in humanity in these times of rage? What would Gandhi say?
Times of intolerance. Look, I am not going to get into political matters because I am truly a philosopher. I would not get involved, but I'll tell you something. I am 55 years old, and in my lifetime, and in my studies of the past, of the time before my 55 years, I have not known many people who defended anything other than violence. I do not see this phenomenon as something new. It is one of the complicated things, wanting to place the blame for the world's problems on a scapegoat, thinking that by eliminating it, we solve the problem. We are filled with violence within ourselves every day. In our lives, in general, we practice acts of violence in our thoughts and in our feelings. Our habit of looking for someone to blame for everything is itself an act of violence. Go look in the history of humanity for a time when there was no violence. Egypt was magnificent, but it had its moments of violence. Where did that person live whose soul did not contain even a drop of violence? If such people existed, they were very few, and perhaps you could count them on the fingers of one or two hands at most. The rest of history, in any direction you look, is filled with violence. Be careful with the habit of finding scapegoats. We cannot simply place our sins onto a ram and, poof, cut off its head and have everything be over. That is symbolic, not explicit. Be careful with this habit. Eliminate violence within yourself, and you will be doing a great deal for the history of humanity. Break free from this inertia. This is one of the messages I would like to leave, using the life of great individuals as an example. Do not be thought for, think for yourself. And when you say that someone incites violence or did this or that, aren't you also inciting, even when you are saying that? I'm a philosopher. No one will convince me to become a political activist.